And tip number one, do not apply fragrances that way. Welcome back to Father Fragrance. This is Tyler. We're jumping right back into our series on how to apply fragrance, except for today, we're getting into actually how to apply them to maximize their effectiveness. Now that we already know when and where, choosing based on time and place, as well as finding the fragrances that we actually like to begin with. We got those down. Now we got to figure out how to wear these things. Stick around, we'll jump right in. Let's get it. All right, guys, so how do we apply fragrances? That's the whole entire thing that we're trying to do here, right? We're gonna look at a few different things that we can do to maximize that effectiveness, right? So we're gonna learn when to apply them before we go and take on the day. Two, where do we actually want to spray the fragrance? Third thing is we wanna learn how to actually spray it. And then lastly, what we'll do is we'll look at a few common mistakes that people like to do whenever they're applying fragrances. And these are things that you probably are already doing that are actually to your detriment. So we'll go through all these different things here step by step, okay? All right, so first things first, when are we going to be applying our fragrance for the day? So the best practice is honestly to apply it as soon as you get out of the shower. Believe it or not, dry, clean skin is going to be your best bet. That keeps your fragrance from intermingling with different molecules like dirt and grime and other things like that. Can actually kind of muck up the skin chemistry. So the whole point, right, you're spraying, applying to your skin, is you want that fragrance to actually mend and mix with your own normal, natural body oils and things like that. So that's how you're going to get that specific skin chemistry with the scent for you, right? Additionally, you want it to be dried off. So you don't want to apply it while it's wet. That's pretty obvious, right? If there's water molecules on there, it's actually applying to the water, not your skin. So when you dry off, it'll disappear. That one's pretty self-explanatory. The last thing is I would recommend that you should apply some kind of like a moisturizer or an unscented lotion, or scented one if you're good at trying to find a way to layer fragrances. If you're really good at figuring that stuff out, you can try that too. And the whole reason for that is dry skin. And when I say dry, I don't mean like there's no water. I mean like it's actually lacking moisture on the skin itself. That tends to soak up the fragrance oils and what they call like thirsty or hungry skin, right? So you'll spray it on there and it just swallows it right up. The scent kind of disappears. Your body's gonna absorb those fragrance oils before they can actually disseminate into the air around you, and it'll become what they call a skin scent. That's just a term that means that pretty much the only way you're going to smell it is if you put your nose up to it, right? You got it up close and you're smelling it on yourself. Nobody else is going to be able to smell it. So keep that in mind too. Make sure that your skin is actually moisturized ahead of time, okay? The other time I would recommend applying a fragrance is right before you're about to leave, right? So especially if longevity is a concern for you. So one of two things, you either have a very long day ahead of you, or two, you have a fragrance that doesn't last very long. I would recommend waiting as long as you can essentially to spray that fragrance on you. I also like to wait until I actually have clothes on too, so that actually you can kind of pick up some of that on the clothes a little bit too. And we'll get into that a little bit more on where we apply it and why I like to actually do it that way. So that pretty much covers it for when to apply. The next thing we're gonna cover is where to apply the fragrance. Now, I have a feeling that this is the thing that most of y'all are actually interested in learning about because you've probably seen or heard lots of different things all throughout your life about where you should be applying fragrances. And some of those are good and some of those are either flat out wrong or just kind of myths, right? Like they just kind of not exactly true, you know? So where are some of the spots that we want to be applying the fragrance? Typically, you're going to hear that the best places to apply fragrances are going to be in like hot spots, right? Pulse points. That's going to be spots that the blood vessels are closest to your skin. So they're a little bit warmer than most other spots. These are, if you have any ideas about what those are, it's pretty easy, right, to figure it out once you've already heard those kinds of things. Relatively self-evident. So that's going to be up around your neck, probably the most popular place to spray, right? Up around your neck. Some people do the shoulders, so up here. Other folks will do on the chest. That's another spot that you'll see, like actually your chest on your skin, not the clothes, right? Another very, very popular place is on the insides of your elbow. So this kind of like the bend of your arm. That's a really popular spot. Same with the wrist, right? Just inside of your wrist. Those are very common. I'm gonna tell you right now though, a secret and one of my favorite spots to apply. This is a Father Fragrance super secret tip, but the back of my hands, okay? I'm telling you, spraying like this. If I get up here, let me see. Just like this, up on the back of the hands, this spot, at least for me, and I don't know if it's because this is more moisturized skin than my inner wrists, is those don't work so good for me. Usually I just kind of eat up the fragrance. And some of that is because it's rubbing against like fabrics. If you're wearing long sleeve shirts, it kind of rubs off on it. That is not a spot that works very well for me, but I'm telling you, the back of the hand, it stays all day. And because as you can already see, you watch some of these videos, I talk with my hands a lot. I move these things all over the place. I'm moving that fragrance all over, right? And it really works really well for me for projection and sillage and stuff. So I really like that spot. A couple of the other kind of stranger spots I've ever heard, people will go like back behind their knees. I have no idea what the benefit of that would be. I can't imagine anybody other than small children smelling that to begin with, right? Like I'm a pretty tall guy, and even the back of my knees is not coming up through somebody's nose. So I don't know. That's just something I've seen and researched before. I don't do that, but maybe it works for you, right? Lastly, applying to clothes. Okay, so you'll get mixed reviews on this. Can you apply to clothes? Yes. There are some drawbacks. The first one being that typically when you apply to clothes, you're going to get a much more linear fragrance. What does that mean? That means that whenever you spray that on, what you smell off the top is pretty much all you'll get. You're not going to get the full breakdown through the different layers of the fragrance. So coming from the top, mid, and base, you won't really get that complex movement through those notes. That's not the end of the world all the time, right? Like some people, maybe that's better. Some people only like the opening of a scent anyways, and it kind of lingers a little more when it's applied to clothes. Think about like if you've ever been to maybe a big department store or something and they sprayed for you on a tester strip, that actually does smell different than what it'll smell like on you. And you may have already experienced that before in your life. Some people really like the way it'll smell off that tester strip, but when they wear it, they don't. So maybe if you liked that fragrance on the tester strip, bought it, sprayed it on yourself and didn't like it, you realize, oh, okay, maybe I could just spray it on clothes. Then that's one way you can do that, right? The other thing is you'll hear mixed things about whether spraying on clothes actually increases projection or decreases it. I've heard all kinds of different things about this. I have, to be completely transparent, I have no idea which one's right or not. I've experienced both from different fragrances, so I really think that's a case-by-case basis. Last thing about spraying on clothes, you gotta be careful of that, especially with higher concentration. And we'll go through what those things are in another video one day. But on your higher concentrations, like an extrait de parfum or just a parfum, and you're applying that to clothes, some of that's really heavy and it can destroy your clothes, right? Especially lighter colored clothing. That stuff, those oils will stay and wash in there and stain your clothes. So if you got nice clothes that you want to take care of, you got to keep that in mind. So just to wrap it up, apply in those pulse points. Go to the warmer spots in your body, right? The reason why we want to keep that on our skin is that is the way perfumes, fragrances, right, are intended. So when a perfumer makes a fragrance, the intended scent that they're going to pick up on that fragrance is only going to come from actually being applied to your skin. That's where you're going to get that special, unique chemical kind of reaction on your skin with that fragrance. You're going to get a unique combination, right? And that's why certain fragrances can smell slightly different on different people. Not vastly different, but just a little bit different, right? And then again, if you're gonna apply it to clothes, just be mindful of what kind of concentration you have in that fragrance before you apply it. And that pretty much covers where to apply fragrances. Okay, and then the last thing I wanna cover is going to be how to actually apply that fragrance. When we actually grab our bottle and we're ready to do it, how are we gonna do that? All right, so let me go ahead and grab one for you, right? So today I'm just gonna show you Lattafa's Assad. We're gonna use that as our test. And so what I like to do, right, is I gotta make sure that I am applying in a way that's actually gonna get the fragrance on my body, okay? The typical distance is going to be where you're gonna hold the bottle. It's 3 to 6 inches. Now I know for some of y'all, that's gonna be a little easier to figure out than others. You know what I'm saying? Anyways, so back to it. 3 to 6 inches is what we're looking at. Any further than that, and you're just wasting spray. So if I'm out here just kind of shooting way far away, it's just kind of going through the air, eventually landing on the ground. That's the same thing with that mist cloud thing that you saw me do in the beginning. You're just spraying it all over the place and walking through it. That is not very effective whatsoever. Almost all of the fragrance is gonna end up on the ground. Your room's gonna smell good, but you ain't gonna smell nothing, okay? You're not gonna smell like anything walking around. So 3 to 6 inches. Any closer than that and you're risking like overspraying, right? So getting it way on there, it's gonna be super hyper concentrated. And any further, you're just wasting it to begin with, all right? So let's just do it as an example, right? So let's just do the inside of the elbow here. So about here, right? Just boom, easy as that, all the way through, nothing to it. So that'd be like a normal application spot and spray, right? The other thing about how to apply it is the amount, right? This is where we're gonna get into some variables, okay? So a couple things to consider when trying to figure out how many sprays that you need. It's really gonna depend on these things. First of all, how strong is that fragrance? So when I spray it one time, is it filling up the room? Well, then I got news for you. One is plenty, like that's more than enough, right? So if you have a super strong fragrance that fills a room up like that, then you gotta consider drawing that back. It's always best to apply light at first, and then if you feel like maybe you're not getting enough out of it, then apply a little more. I like to test with my wife. So what I would recommend is if you have, if you live with somebody else, it doesn't have to be a significant other, it can be anybody, a brother, a friend, whatever, roommate, who cares? But before you go, so somebody that you trust to actually tell you real, legitimate input, hey, is this too much? Like, do I have too much on me? This is important, especially for men. For whatever reason, it seems that overspraying for men is a much bigger taboo than it is for women. If you smell a woman who has lots of perfume on them, people don't usually get upset. If you're a guy, you are immediately like douchey, right? You're the Cologne guy. You're like a dude nobody wants to be around. There's just some kind of negative connotation that comes with that. So just always start with light application, okay? Then the other thing is learning your fragrance. So whenever you have this, especially on a new one and you're learning that, you start light and then you apply more as needed. Certain fragrances are a little weaker, are gonna require a little more, right? So I'm just looking through here, right? Like a couple of these guys I have up here, like, okay, Dolce & Gabbana, right? The one. Now I wouldn't recommend spraying this one, like overspraying this, because I usually use this as a date night fragrance, and I've already talked to you guys about this before. Typically I want that to be more intimate, so I'm gonna keep it that way by spraying less to draw folks in, right? Well, not folks, my wife specifically, rather than blowing her nose off from, a couple feet away. But this is a pretty quiet fragrance. If you do over apply a little bit, not gonna be the end of the world. That's what I'm getting at, okay? Most of these are pretty loud, so that's why I'm like, I don't have a lot of really good examples of ones that I would spray a little more of. There's really none. Most of these ones are pretty strong, to be honest. But anyways, that's something to consider. Weaker fragrances, you can give a little more. The same as it's just like I said before, the opposite. The stronger the fragrance is, you really gotta be careful. And then the last kind of tip about this is if you do apply something and you start light and you start to notice that it's either faded away, then you can just reapply. Like it's totally okay to have a little bit more either sitting around. Like I've talked about before, I like to use like travel sprays or decants, and I'll bring those with me to reapply if I'm wearing a weaker fragrance in particular, or maybe it's a very long day. So that's something that you can do as well. It keeps you from running the risk of over applying, with the exception of you do got to make sure that you cross-reference that with somebody else. So in other words, just because you can't smell it on yourself does not mean it's not still pushing. You can be getting nose blind to that fragrance. You've been sitting in it a long time, and there are certain fragrances in particular that have different kind of notes in them that will make them more susceptible to nose blindness. And the last thing you want to do is go reapply a bunch of fragrance because you thought it was gone, but it's actually still kicking. So again, check that with somebody else, okay, before you start reapplying. Okay, and then the last thing I want to cover is just some common mistakes that I see or I've heard from a lot of men when they're applying fragrances. And we've kind of covered them like kind of throughout as I've gone through the different tips and tricks here on how to apply this stuff. But I'm just going to recap them here so that way you have basically one spot where you can visit this and be like, okay, let me make sure I ain't doing these things, right? So a couple of those things, right, is going to be over applying. That's like one of the easiest ones to avoid. When I say that, I usually don't do more than, I would say 3 to 5 is usually what I'm looking at. And it really is dependent upon what we're wearing. Like I talked about, stronger fragrance, 2 or 3, and then a weaker one, maybe 4 or 5, right? And I like to do it like this. I usually do 2 on the, I like the collarbone area a lot. I always say that one's for me, right? It keeps me being able to smell it. And then it's a really good spot for sillage, like as I'm moving around. It moves kind of in that nose path of a lot of people. And then I really like to do 2 on the back of the hand. That's where I like it. Most people use the inside of their wrist, but I've already talked about the back of the hand is really better for me. Don't know why, that is just the way it is for me. So that's usually what I'll do for that. To avoid over applying, I just use that kind of number, 3 to 5, and then I really just try to stick to it, even if I really want to be really loud with my fragrances, for whatever reason that day. Another thing to do to avoid over applying is if you have a bottle that has no atomizer on it, so it just splashes, don't just chuck it onto your skin, right? Do something like cover it with your finger, shake it so that it applies to the finger, and then apply it to the spot that you're looking for. That'll just make it a little easier to control how much you're actually applying on your skin. Here's a really common one that people do, rubbing your skin together. So there's different kind of theories as to why you don't do this, but ultimately for me, it comes down to a couple things. So I'll just go through some of the things they talk about. I've researched this before, and people will say that actually breaks down the fragrance in a way that is not intended by the perfumer. So it like kind of almost accelerates the actual breakdown of that scent by kind of messing up the chemical reaction of your skin and the fragrance oils by like rubbing them deeper in. That's not how it was meant to be applied. It's supposed to just rest on your skin and kind of naturally mingle with it. The other thing about that, right, is if you rub, you're actually kind of wearing out that fragrance to begin with. So I think that's really what it's more about. You can just, if you really want it on both sides, just do it, and you think you're gonna overdo it, just half spray each. You're gonna get the same kind of amount on there without kind of messing with the actual chemical compound, right? And so that's what I would recommend for that. Okay, and so that kind of wraps up this one. I hope that this helped out, right? So we covered when to apply the fragrance, best to do it on clean, moisturized skin, where to apply fragrances, best to apply on pulse points like hot spots on the body. And then we also learned how to actually apply it. Don't position it too far or too close, and then not too much or too little, right? And that's gonna be something you learn over time. So you just gotta play with those things and get feedback from people that you actually trust to tell you the truth, right? Don't go to somebody who's just a smoke blower who's just gonna tell you everything you do is great. Like maybe your mama's not the one. You know what I'm saying? Find a friend or a spouse, right? Somebody you know is going to tell you the truth, right? That's kind of what I recommend for that. And then lastly, we looked at some of the kind of common mistakes that men run into when they're applying fragrances. So I really hope that this was something you found educational, something that you found that may help you in the future when you're learning how to apply fragrances, right? If it didn't, I'm sorry. I am very happy that you stuck around for this, but I thank you for staying around long enough to get this far. I hope that you'll come back and let me know down in the comments whether there was something I could do better, something I didn't cover that you really wanted the answers to, and we can kind of flesh that out down in the comments, and I'm more than happy to readdress that in the future. With that all being said, it's been my absolute pleasure. I'm Tyler, this is Father Fragrance, and I hope that this will help y'all stay smelly, y'all. See you next time.